Before we get started in this episode, a quick announcement. As you know, I'm very passionate about acceptance and commitment therapy, and I also run a busy practice in Canberra. We're currently looking for psychologists who are registered in Australia to join our team, who are also passionate about learning about ACT. We provide supervision on a group and individual basis and training around ACT. So if this is you, if you're interested, please express your interest at strategicpsychology.com.au/careers. Look forward to hearing from you. And now back to this episode.
Okay, life can be crazy. You're feeling like you're sinking, just trying to find a meaning. It's time for better thinking. Yeah, better thinking. Time to tune in. Let's go.
Welcome back to Better Thinking. My name is Nesh Nikolic, and today I have two guests joining us, Richard Hill and Matt Dahlitz, who are both psychotherapists and have a really interesting background in acting and directing. Later on in life, they found a passion towards mental health and therapy and have written a book, The Practitioner's Guide to the Science of Psychotherapy. Today, we discuss their book, what they have identified as being valuable appreciations and understandings about what psychotherapy is about, and really an approach to how to learn about psychology and psychotherapy. And I think some interesting perspectives come from both Richard and Matt, and I think you'll enjoy this show. Richard, Matt, big thank you and welcome to the show.
Hey Nesh, good to be here.
Yeah, thanks very much for having us on. It's great. I've been looking. We've enjoyed looking at your office. It's fantastic.
It is.
Look, it's exciting to have you both here today. This is the first time I've had dual guests, so it'll be a different dynamic. But also, I think it's an exciting, different flow of different ideas and perspectives in this space of therapy and what psychotherapy means, the science around and the like. And I think it's nice to have an open roundtable discussion. So thank you for both making yourselves available.
Beautiful.
Now, maybe we can start with finding out a little bit of background from you both. I might start with yourself, Richard.
Oh, right, me, yes. A long and fascinating journey. This is actually, I don't know, maybe my third or fourth career, but my second sort of expression of engagement with human beings and being human. My first career was as an actor and a professional entertainer, singer, songwriter. So I was that till I was probably early 40s. And unfortunately, I didn't become famous. I don't know what happened, but we had a good go at it and did some wonderful things and met some wonderful people and traveled a lot. And then I began studying because I was so interested in language, obviously. So I started doing bits and pieces, did a linguistics undergraduate degree, and they said, "Oh, that's interesting. Human behavior. Oh, yeah." So then I did a master's degree in social ecology, and then I thought I'd teach, so I better do one in education, and then I thought I'd do all this brain and mind stuff, so I better do one in that. So just sort of things just emerged, did a lot of study, actually just about to launch into a PhD, which will be better late than never, and I am hiring a wheelchair for the celebration. But the whole framework of a lifetime of trying to engage with the human experience. And I just did my practical first, and I did my academic later, which is not a bad way of doing things. So met Matt a bunch of years ago. We started writing and working together, and then finally he invited me to join the Science of Psychotherapy. And good gosh, here we are. There's the potted history. Matt, how's your history pot?
So I also spent a lot of years at university, about 13 years full-time at university, so a perpetual student. The learning has never stopped, whether I'm at university or not. Started off in psychology. After undergraduate, I didn't go on to do postgraduate in psych. I went to the conservatorium and I did music. And I did undergraduate and a postgraduate course there in composition. I thought I was going to be a film composer. After spending a year in London, living on cheap wine and rice and trying to make it in the industry, I came home and I got a real job, this time as a paramedic. And I spent a decade as an advanced care paramedic, learning a little bit more about humanity and physiology and all of that, which was terribly interesting. And I got a renewed interest in psychology. So I went back and did a master's degree in a course that sort of combined counselling psychology with neuroscience, which was very interesting. They were running that at the University of Queensland at the time. And then after that, I started the neuropsychotherapist and hooked up with Richard, and we've been doing that since 2013.
Yeah, and we shifted it to shift the brand from the neuropsychotherapist, which was sort of something which was associated with an early piece of work, and realized that actually there's more to us than that. And in fact, being too specific and too siloed and too disciplinary is the wrong approach. And so we shifted the brand name to the Science of Psychotherapy. And we've been forever trying to explain to people that we're not talking about the modern sort of academic form of scientific work, which is a bit reductionist and differentiated, but more that broader Greek aspect of science, which is the learning about, the knowledge of. And interestingly enough, we're almost full circle with our talents, because now we're making documentaries within the Science of Psychotherapy. Matt's got a film, his kids are a cinematographer. That's great. And of course, Matt is composing scores for our documentaries. And I'm using my voiceover talents that I learned back in acting school. So it's wonderful to see how your life, everything's useful when you're creative.
It's wonderful to be able to see the synergy of all of these things coming together that we've had a passion for and have studied. And as Richard was saying, we went from the neuropsychotherapist to the Science of Psychotherapy, and now our sort of branching out into documentary world, we're naming that the Science of Us. I'm thinking, Richard, we're getting broader and broader. I think the next iteration should be just us. Or
yes,
humanity or something.
Besides, we keep coming back to the fact that all this stuff is here. All this stuff is here to look at, and what we keep trying to do is explain it as a restriction. I was just writing something the other day on the Recent magazine that we've fallen into this trap of developing methodologies that satisfy the theory. And kind of forget where the theory came from, and the theory actually came from what already exists. And we're just trying to understand and explain. And now we come back to just our simple practice, like you with people sitting in the chair. We're just trying to understand that person on the other side of the table.
Yeah. Maybe I can start with something broad about what are the primary learnings that you've both had, not only in your studies but as human beings, on this psychotherapy, perspective of being with people, of listening and learning, and how we as human beings get stuck. How do we potentially untangle ourselves? What are the pitfalls that we have as human beings from your perspective?
I think one of the things that I learned in doing psychology and in emergency services, as a paramedic, is that there is an awful overlap in what is going on in the mind and the body and in our, social connectedness. And, we can't just be addressing, the mind on its own. We have to address the mind in context. And, as a paramedic, you're a counselor, in the back of the ambulance with people. And it's not just about what's going on physiologically, it's what's going on socially and, psychologically for them. And reciprocally, you know, there's a lot of psychological stuff that's going on that has a direct impact on their physiology. And this synergy between the psychology, physiology, and, you know, social connectedness, all of this really grabbed my attention, and I started reading the interpersonal neurobiology crew, everything that they were saying, and Richard was terribly involved in all of that back when I first met him. And I think from those, you know, experiences forward, my conception of, you know, dealing with mental health issues is to deal with the whole person in context. And I think that's been a, you know, a great motivator to learn a lot more. As you can see from the, you know, my bookshelf, I'm always wanting to learn a lot more about a whole lot of different aspects of humanity. And some of those things reach into, you know, quantum theory and the history of art, and a whole lot of things which seem very, you know, which are tangential to what someone might be suffering.
Yeah, it's good stuff, Matt. This what's beautiful, I think, as you go along. See, for me, coming from the perspective of being a performer, an actor, someone who is engaged in hundreds and hundreds of lives, talk about you know, excellent field work. I actually did a workshop at the Erickson Foundation a few years ago, entitled "Almost Everything I Know in Psychotherapy I Learned in Acting School," and it's actually true. Rather than just being a sort of a cutesy type of element, that aspect of the nature of what creates the individual person at the time, what you know, we might call the me, the thing that emerges from the experience, the persona, the schemas, the various things that emerge into the experience, can vary enormously. And, you know, I could be playing Hamlet, and then, you know, the director says cut or pause, or, you know, we'll take a break, and then 2 seconds later, I'm no longer Hamlet, I'm Richard again. And we had a most extraordinary exercise that we used to do. We used to get a large circle, you know, draw a large circle and divide it up into various quadrants, maybe 4, maybe 5, and we would give each quadrant a persona, some kind of human experience. It might be an old person, might be a young person, might be a different gender, might be some homosexual experience, it might be an asexual experience, and you would literally step from quadrant to quadrant and feel yourself reorganize the potentials within you and what you're capable of, and find that this could emerge. So when I got into a situation of counselling, and I looked across and I saw somebody who was anxious or depressed or expressing some kind of affect disorder or difficulty or structure, I just thought, what's the play? What's the drama that is creating this to emerge? And how can we change that? And then, of course, as I studied, there were lots and lots of mechanisms and methods and techniques that we could use to stimulate and assist and facilitate this person's change. Because as different from me as the competent actor, who, when the director said cut, I was able to move from one to the other, sometimes we can't. And we know this with some actors as well. Peter Sellers, one of his greatest problems was knowing who he was. He got so disappeared into all these different characters. So that would be one of the most important things, the diversity of our personal expression, that we are many me's from a basic I. And then the second thing that was extraordinary was meeting Ernest Rossi and bothering him to the point that he took me on as more as an apprentice than a mentee. And then he took me into the world of knowledge and that engagement, because he's a great, extraordinary visionary. And so we went into genetics, and we went into, and in the last few years, quantum, but sadly he passed away a couple of years ago. So we're only a tenth of the way into that. But the neuroscience and that blending of understanding, using understanding to enhance, or using knowledge to enhance our understanding, rather than the other way around.
Yeah, Richard, you just reminded me too, when I was doing composition and training to be a film composer, very similar to, being an actor. You have to interpret, what's happening on the screen. You have to understand all of the subtleties of the emotional elements that are coming about, and then translate that into some sort of musical, motif. And I think that for me also, like it was for you as an actor, developing that empathic attunement to what's happening on the screen, or for you, what's happening in the character, has been very instrumental in developing myself as a therapist, but then also how I, view therapy per se.
It's interesting hearing from both of you with that background in acting and directing, in that as an actor, I can only assume, but you are putting on a persona which has its own characteristics and traits and biases and view of the world, which can be very much different to yourself, or might have some aspects that are similar to you, but you are able to, in essence, observe the character, while also being that character, or playing that character. And as a director, you're in the observer role all the time. You're just noticing and observing, and in some sense, both those spaces have a relationship with therapy in that, the observer is incredibly helpful, because they're non-judgmental. Obviously, as a director, you probably do have to hold a level of judgment. Otherwise, all you're doing is, observing. You need to have an active role, but this observing concept is so important, that it's non-judgmental and can see, for example, thoughts as thoughts, feelings as feelings, without attaching too much meaning to them, but maybe then revisiting and observing from another perspective as well. At least that's what jumped out at me from hearing from both of you.
Well, there's that interesting aspect that which we talk about in quantum a little bit more, and in complexity theory, but the observer operator, this capacity for a single entity, and let's just talk about us humans for the moment, rather than going off into too much peculiarity, but just looking at us, that we have the capacity to both be the actor, be doing something, and at the very same time observe that doing, and they'd be separable. It certainly, that was something you need to practice quite a lot, and of course that's what acting was terrific as doing. I mean, I could be doing my Hamlet character, but at the same time, so I'm the operator of the performance, but at the same time I'm observing and saying, oh, that was a good bit. You do that one tomorrow night, because that was good. And also, hey, oh gosh, there's a cockroach walking across the road. Please don't pay attention to that, because that's not supposed to be there. And I say that because that would happen quite often in theatre. And this, but what's interesting is when you move into the aspect of the individual who's coming to you with problems, is that their operator is certainly expressing the difficulties that they're going through. So they're expressing a depression, or they're expressing difficult behaviours, or expressing emotions, and it's their observer that has the biases. It's their observer that is mucked up, because they can't see it. Well, this is one of the aspects, anyway, of looking at it. How is their observer going? And very often, I've got a client at the moment, and I said to something just the other day. I said, "Oh, look, you're going down that path again, down into the traumatic rabbit hole." And she said, "How do you know that?" And I said, "How do you not?" And we went into a deep discussion. And so we've been doing a lot of work on her observer. So what we might call the self-awareness. We might call getting the felt sense. So when we say a felt sense, what we're doing is we're taking an objective, meaning a looking into view of what their operator, their being, is already doing. So in other words, you're not talking about getting a felt sense that doesn't exist. You're getting a felt sense of something that does exist, but you're not able to engage with it. And of course, then we get into the other area immediately of, okay, so why aren't you able to integrate those two elements, which is what we talk about in interpersonal neurobiology, Dan Siegel and Lou Cozzolino and Alan Shaw and many of these things. And then, of course, Ian McGilchrist, when we talk about left and right hemisphere integration and top to bottom integration and all these aspects, why aren't we integrating? And then, of course, we start to piece together and we get the enormous value of the researchers and the producers of explanations and understandings of how these barriers come into place, attachment issues, insecure attachment, trauma barriers, so on and so forth. And then understanding of mechanisms that the client can utilize to resolve those issues. So all this starts to play together and I like to think in like this rather than, like this, that sort of systemic thing rather than the linear thing.
Yeah, and it is quite incredible.
Jump across to you, Matt, my apologies. It sounds to me like the space of reflective practice is somewhat what we're trying to achieve there by observing the observer, having an opportunity after the fact to reflect, to go back and ask ourselves, how did that scenario play out? How could have I done it? How could have I responded in a particular way? How might I do it in the future? And we must practice that if we're going to improve as therapists, or maybe if we're going to improve as spouses or siblings, partners, friends, colleagues, that we get an opportunity to reflect and repeat, but repeat with maybe a more nuanced approach, that we respond a little bit different as a therapist, or as an actor. You get to go out and say, I'm doing this scene one more time, and I'm going to learn from the 7 prior ways that I've expressed it, or how I've read my lines, or my tone, my timing, and so on. That the reflective side I'm hearing is extremely important.
And Matt, I know you got some things, but because in relation to that, because it's so interesting. What we do is we talk about that reflection as being the observer. What you're actually doing when you're doing the experience, you're the observer operator at the time. And then afterwards, you are the observer operator again of the observer operator that you were. So in that reflection, you're having an objective look at your personal expression of your reflection. So you reflect, coming up with conclusions, and you also are observing your reflection. So there's quite a lot of depth. Explaining, hopefully that explains it as simply as we can. But the framework of this, I mean, we hear it. Well, certainly Scott Miller is talking a lot now about deliberate practice and trying to encourage therapists to, at the end of the session, to observe and reflect and do all those sorts of bits and pieces and improve. But if you look at the observer operator and then the observer operator reflecting, what you do is you actually have a moment by moment experience, which then can be re-examined moment by moment and explored. So there's an enormous number of layers, and this is, of course, systemic thinking that expands that capacity. But reflection is, I mean, I'm astounded that people can actually get from one end of a psychotherapy session to the other without ever really taking an observer, reflection, responsive feedback shift as they go, as an actor does with the audience making some reaction, because they're so busy following a formality, a method or a thing, that they missed the fact that the client wasn't enjoying it until I asked them at the end. So there's many layers of observing and operating can occur at the same time, and reflection. But yes, it's very important. Sorry, Matt, I just wanted to add that other layer, which we haven't talked about before, I don't think.
No, that's, I was just going to add in talking about layers, I think it's amazing what we do as therapists when you think about, so we're in our observing self, we're regulating our own affect, we're having an empathic attunement with the client, we're also trying to understand what's happening in their higher cortical, cognitive appraisal of themselves. And we're doing all of this simultaneously. So this capacity to be in our bodies, in our observing self, and in the client all at the same time, all receiving feedback, it's incredible. And I don't think we have a full appreciation of what we're actually doing here.
And amazing, yes, as Dan Siegel talks about mindsight, the ability to actually replay the other person's experience in your own mind. So we're replaying them, we're replaying us. Then there's the natural self-organization, which is producing things spontaneously. We're pretty extraordinary. We're pretty extraordinary.
Now, in terms of, why we've written the book and why are we going on about all of these different things, if I could just touch on this intuition that we rely on. Our intuition is built upon a whole lot of stuff that we learn about, we know, we experience, and that we sort of bed down. And then in the moment, things sort of bubble up and we have that intuitive, an impression or knowledge sort of just comes to the surface. But it doesn't just come out of nowhere. And, this is where, we need to know a lot about a lot of different things. We don't necessarily need to be an expert in every area, but we at least need to be aware, and we need to know about, as Richard was saying earlier. And so this is where, we want to bring people to a banquet of a whole multitude of things, and to try everything, and to have a bit of an experience and knowledge of a whole lot of things, so that when it comes to their intuition in the therapy session, there's a lot that they can draw on. And it may not be, you might not be consciously aware that you're drawing on those things that you've learned about. But they will bubble to the surface. And Richard, you want to maybe give some examples of how that happens?
Yeah, well, this is the thing that when we do get bound up in our method, sometimes we can miss the changes. And I'll be doing a presentation in a few weeks, and I think we can almost look at the therapeutic experience in 5 sort of regions, although it's a Venn diagram. It's not an isolated thing, but we have sometimes a client just needs comfort. They just, and we talk about this a lot, holding the space, which is terrific. Sometimes they just need some skills. So that's really what has been unfortunately isolated, but called coaching. They just need, how do I go out and get a job? Sometimes we need sort of counselling, which I think is where we're working in the current, in the present, the immediate needs. And I think we need to divide that up between counselling and psychological counselling, where sometimes we're just getting them a job, getting them a home, getting them some food, getting them out of a dangerous situation. But then there's also the immediate affective and emotional disturbances that are occurring. So people who are anxious now because of COVID, for example, they may never have been anxious in their lives. So this is not necessarily about their past traumas. This is just now. So we've got that. And then there's that psychotherapeutic, psychological, and then the prime extent of that, the physiological thing, the psychiatry. That's when we're starting to look at what pre-exists. And so we may be going back to psychological history, biological history, and so on and so forth. And so that sort of framework could appear almost all at the same time. You could be comforting someone, making them feel okay, giving them rapport, settling down, and then they're saying, oh, I just need this, and you say, well, here's something to do there, and then they say something that indicates that this has been going on for a long time, and then suddenly you're over really dealing with past issues. And we need to be that flexible. And in order to be that flexible, you need to know the existence of these possibilities. And most of us get it through experience. And to some degree, we get it from grad school, but we tend to be taught the elements in grad school. It's like going and learning piano. You tend to be taught the scales. But then it's letting them flow, and then eventually you improvise the notes as required.
Yeah. So there's some, times that I've had, clients that are manifesting a psychological, they might be anxious or depressed, and just the thought will come to me, about some other a physiological or a lifestyle change that may be useful, and often those things are the key. I remember one woman in particular. And she was terribly anxious, and the thought just came to me about her thyroid. And I just said, well, what's going on with your thyroid? And she she was surprised that I would even mention that. And she did have a bit of a history with her thyroid. And I said, well, do you think you should get that checked out again? And she did. And she found that the answer to her anxiety was actually something that was going on in her thyroid. And I was able to, pass her off to a naturopath who was able to tweak things, and that dealt with her anxiety. There was no need for, memory reconsolidation or any deep psychological work. It was purely a physiological thing that was happening with her.
Yes, and the emotive, the affective state was emerging as a message saying,
That's
"Hey,
right.
Pay attention." I often say to people, 3 times a day, you get this very blunt, really dull, uninformative, but broadly motivating message that emerges out of really what is occurring for about an hour or longer, and about 40 different molecular and biochemical processes. And the best we come up with in our conscious awareness is, I'm hungry.
Yeah.
That's it. We don't know what for, but it's enough to motivate us. And so on an evolutionary level, a lot of the things that emerge to the surface are only there to motivate us to move towards some kind of resolution. And this is why we talk about, it's not just about fixing the symptoms, it's about seeing where the symptoms, why they emerge.
And in saying that too, I'm not an expert, in all of the physiology. I mean, yes, I've had a background as a paramedic, so I might have a little bit more than many psychologists, but when you're studying psychology, you get a fair degree of understanding of physiology, and so it's just building on that and continuing to build on that so that you're aware.
We better let Nesh get in now, Matt. Sorry.
One of the really fascinating things that I find, and I just haven't been able to unravel it, I'm not quite sure if I will, is this concept of intuition, how we connect things together. And one of the most interesting sort of things of late that I have discovered is that in B.F. Skinner's work, where he put a pigeon and rats in a box and got them to effectively hit a button that would release some food, and looked at the behavioural response of the animals. What we learnt at university is that obviously if you put the animals into a variable reward system, meaning they don't know if they're going to get a pellet every time that they strike the button 3 times or 9 times or 2 times, that is varied. They strike the button most vigorously. But what we didn't hear about is that in actual fact, each of the animals did something really interesting. So some would, for example, flick their head to the left-hand side before they hit the button. Another one would, wag their, tail in a particular way before they hit the button. And in actual fact, it kind of showed that they connected that hitting the button wasn't just about hitting the button. If you shifted your head to the left and then hit the button, you'd get the reward, which means we want to, animals want to associate things. And obviously that part has been cut out in research and discussed as though it's only striking the button. But we do this really strange thing where we connect things. And that to me is really fascinating, because when we talk about intuition, and I know this is what we do in therapy, we have an inkling to go in one direction, not another, or to pose a question in a particular way. And I'm wondering how much of that is just me being a pigeon flicking my head before I hit the button. And if I get a valuable response, then I feel as though I've got the magic sauce. So long as I flick the head with the next client and then ask that question in that way, I'm going to get a really good result versus, the direct button. And that to me is really fascinating, because as humans, so much of us is based on these narratives, on these explanations, on meaning, fancy words, theories. And I'm wondering how much we're still animals.
Yeah, it's a really good thing to bring up, because we've had this movement through the therapeutic, the psychotherapeutic, the psychological framework. I mean, we talk about the three developments: the psychodynamic, sort of coming in through Freud, then Skinner coming in with behaviorism, and then Maslow and others bringing us into humanism, of which the person-centered response from Rogers was one of the principal emergences from that shift of thinking. And what Matt and I are more interested in saying, it isn't isolated. They aren't separable. And there is absolutely, we are just an animal. And absolutely, we are not just an animal. We are a specific human being, and absolutely we do things through behavioral things, but absolutely we do them through psychodynamic things, and absolutely we do them in broader contextual things. And the way to think about it, which is difficult, because we're taught to think to learn what is right, for someone what is true, but actually all you've got to do is be an actor for 20 years and you find yourself doing all those things all at the same time, and it's not confusing. You just go, oh yeah. So this idea of looking at what Matt was saying in the beginning, this contextual framework, in that we are intuitive most of the time. In other words, we have an inner work, and this is what the insula, the part of the brain called the insula, which sort of hides in a convenient little fold inside the brain. So the part of the brain that really looks at our inner workings is actually sort of an inner fold of the brain. It's quite interestingly metaphoric. But this sense of inner being, we're talking about coming up into our conscious awareness, and that our conscious awareness is what it's about. But this is what I was saying about being hungry. Your conscious awareness isn't aware of anything other than the motivating factor, the thing that will generate self-directed action. And what confuses us is the idea that the consciousness, that our cognitive awareness is all we need to understand. But it is our cognitive awareness which is our doorway. Now, there's wonderful work, and we talk about this in the book in relation to what an emotion is. And we go through various people who've talked about the different aspects. We try and give a broad picture as we go. But I'm most engaged in the work that Joseph Ledoux and Richard Brown and some others are doing, looking at emotions as several stages of awareness that eventually rise up into our cognitive awareness, but they're only a representation. And that representation, now going back to what you were saying in the beginning of part of your comments there, Nesh, the associations and what becomes, so therefore our emotional state, and this is one of the things I love about them, our emotional state is a cognitive or conscious perception of something that is occurring to someone. Now, that only occurs in the high representation that is able to access autobiographical memory. In lower parts, in the subcortical, and particularly going back just into the biological, going back into the biochemical activities that occur, the peptides, the hormones, and then going down again even deeper into the genetics and looking at the epigenetics and the changes in the gene expression, and of course state-dependent gene expression. So depending on your field, that the body is also doing a whole bunch of things totally out of with no relationship to your cognitive awareness at all, and then it produces and puts those things up. So it's an incredible myriad of trickery, that is, magic that is going on. And so when people say, "Oh, I have to analyze, I have to know what my intuition is," the intuition is saying, "Oh, for goodness sake, I'm just telling you you're hungry, so you'll go to the fridge. Can you just learn how to cook?" That would solve your problems. So we get these curious wonders that emerge into our head where we're sitting with the client, and then suddenly we go, they've got this, they've got that, and they've got this problem and that behavior. And then we say, "Have you ever thought about learning how to cook? Where on earth did that come from?" Or, "Have you ever thought about looking at your thyroid?" And it's because we are in tune. It's when we become attuned to the client. And so there's not only this cognitive mentalization that we need to have, but there's this physical, self-organizing, non-conscious engagement. And we know there's a few of these mirror neurons, for example. We know we've learnt that we do have this non-conscious awareness of somebody else's motor capacities, and that we analyze those motor capacities or assess those motor capacities in relation to our own motor capacities. And we do this all beneath conscious awareness, because of course it's very handy to know someone's coming at you with an axe to help chop wood or to help chop you. So we're trying to actually get ahead. The body actually finds conscious awareness useful, but it's slow compared to itself. It's a half a second or so behind the game. So intuition is that conscious awareness of something that's already occurred, because that which has occurred is the immediate processes that have kept us alive as a species for the past million years.
Mm. And just coming back to classical conditioning, I think you would have to have a fairly limited repertoire of intervention that you would continually try to reapply to every client, and then you see some wins every now and then. You'd have to be pretty persistent in that for classical conditioning, I think, to kick in, and then that's the thing that's driving your decision making. But if you're open and you have a large toolbox, and you're open to being responsive, response able, as Richard says, then I don't think that classical conditioning sort of would come into play so much. I may be completely wrong, but that's my intuition.
Yeah, no, but it is true. Ernest Rossi was talking about this in 1985. Is that just as you were saying, Nesh, the therapist does this a few times and it works, and they're going, "Oh, I'm pretty good." But actually, what worked was an interactive engagement where a process was thrown into the mix, which the client found useful, rather than the therapist being the clever person who's fixed the client's inabilities. It was the client who had the abilities. They always had the abilities. They just were blocked from it. And we had a lovely talk with someone a little while ago, and he said, I had a client, and he said, I'd thrown everything at them, and nothing seemed to work. And then the client actually came up with an idea. And so we went with that, and I didn't know what I was doing, because I didn't know what I was doing, but it worked. And it was like, we have our own capacities for seeking well-being, but we're blocked from them, and that usefulness. So Maybe it's a behavioral thing that's needed. Maybe it's a comfort thing. Maybe it's a academic thing. Maybe it's a cognitive thing. Most likely, it's an experience within which all those things find their own value.
Absolutely.
I'm just so aware of confirmation bias that, on the flip side is, rejection bias, that we reject anything that's not in line with our current belief system or, the psychological model. I know, for example, I'm, very much I can say in love with the ACT therapy approach. And so I view not only my therapy through that lens, but my life through that lens. I use that language in my own personal life. It's something that kind of is in my space, but that would also be potentially blinding because I'm forever confirming something, and that doesn't make it right nor wrong. But I'm just mindful of these biases that are there, and this pursuit of trying to figure out what is it that the therapist is doing that makes that difference. What is it in the process, or why can two people be doing CBT, but one's just getting a better therapeutic outcome longitudinally with clients than another? What is that substance in that's so elusive? It's hard to find, because we know whenever we do good science, and I know that this is sort of changing the parameters a little bit, because we're not talking about the science of psychology, more so the learning of it and piecing these things together. But we're trying to also figure out with some certainty what are these elements, and to me that's been a fascination. Even how we use our language or tone. I mean, these are all our soft skills, but to me that's the most exciting part of delivery, language, what's not said. Allowing clients to self-discover rather than trying to get them to discover. There's just so much. It's a forever sort of learning, but it still always begs the question of, am I learning, or is this my current narrative? Because I've been through so many narratives and I don't know what to believe anymore.
Well, let me hesitate to actually suggest that I think I know what the answer is, which I learned in acting school, but also through Ernest Rossi, and which is going to be the subject of the PhD, to see exactly what you're talking about, people experiencing this positive response, this positive action. What am I doing? I love ACT too. ACT is great, acceptance and commitments, but I've got to tell you, as a human being, I go, duh. What do you think Hamlet was doing when he was sitting there saying, to be or not to be? He was trying to figure out what he could accept, do I have to do this? Do I not have to do this? He was spontaneously doing it himself. And so the nature of ACT is within us already. And it's just beautiful the way it's been explored and investigated and expanded and verbalized, so that we can utilize it from the top down, as well as allow it to emerge from the bottom up. But to me, the secret of successful therapy is when you enter a responsive state. I love the person-centered. I think that's where we start. That's great. It's done a lot of things, and it's shifted us from the therapist totally dominant state. But the therapist is still delivering the process, but allowing the client to be important and relational. But by being responsive, what you're doing is the difference between the two CBT workers. One is delivering CBT. The one is utilizing CBT, and in response to the client's the benefits that the client is getting. And I would suggest they might not even, and a lot of people don't even think they're doing it. I think client responsiveness is very prevalent and prominent, and that's what we'll be looking at in the PhD. because you say to someone, well, let's look at the beliefs you have around this this particular action, this particular behavior that you exhibit. And the client sits down and dutifully begins to do the appropriate paperwork. Now, there's a good chance that client will have some success because it's a natural process. But if that client's sitting there and says, but there's this other thing that bothers me, it's the therapist that goes, oh, what's that? As different from, yes, well, we'll get to that after we've done this, what we're doing at the moment, what is important. And I had a lovely chap, a psychotherapist, uses hypnotherapy, and so he does get people coming and say, I want to give up smoking, or I want to learn how to do suggestion, which again is also just the therapist thinking they're important. But anyway, he was working with it, and he's one of my supervisees. So he let himself just allow. So we want to do this work. Is there anything else that you're just thinking of at the moment as I'm going through this? And she said, well, I don't know whether it's relevant, but I was raped when I was 12 and I haven't really talked about it with anybody. Like, oh, how fascinating that this person had held this back. But it was something about my colleague that allowed her to believe that she was able to engage in the process, and he allowed it and listened. So that responsiveness of almost letting the client, we talk about, the therapist is driving and the client's giving directions. It's actually, I think, the other way around. What I call the tail is wagging the dog. We just let the dog do stuff, and if the tail is wagging, then let's enhance it and develop it and utilize. So I would suggest that your preponderant use of ACT is largely supported by the fact that the engagement responsively is positive. And so you end up going there. What's interesting, and what I would love you to do, is the next time when you're in the middle of doing ACT and you shift into something slightly different, that will be the interesting thing. It's saying, why did I shift? What did they do that I intuitively shifted with? That's when you start to become interesting. As we learned in acting school, you go out, you deliver a line. It's what the audience does that tells you how to deliver it. And if you listen to the audience, you'll have a good show. If you don't, we have what we call a wooden actor. And I think we've got a lot of wooden therapists. But even a wooden actor can get a reasonable applaud at the end of the show.
Yeah. And I think, whatever theoretical framework you're coming from, and I think we do need to, when we're based in a theoretical framework, it gives us some confidence. But we're not asking people to abandon their theoretical frameworks. We're asking them to expand on that. And as Richard said, to be response able within those frameworks and to expand those frameworks. So if the framework was a house, have all the doors and windows opened and be open to other things.
Yeah, and let the client choose the room they're interested in.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more about the book.
Matt.
Well, it's quite a journey. We start off in the brain, the central nervous system, and we go through a lot of technical stuff about what's under the hood in terms of the neural system, and we go through a lot of that, and then we sort of expand out from that into different psychopathologies, the different things that can go wrong, what's happening from a genetic basis. Richard is the expert in when it comes to the genetic aspect, which plays into our mental health. And then we look at how other experts use this information and how they integrate it into their practice. And so as we go from the nervous system through to psychopathologies to how these are practically worked out, we hope that everyone would have a very broad, expansive feel for what it is to deal with humanity in the therapy room.
And I think one of the things that we enjoy the most, that Matt and I enjoyed writing the most, certainly filling in the technical background. And I know I did a brain and mind sciences master's degree at Sydney Uni with the Brain and Mind Institute there. And that was fantastic because it filled in all my theoretical knowledge, filled in all the gaps. You know, I'd just been self-taught up to there. So I was always sitting up the back as a very annoying student, and there were lovely professors there. I was the old guy at the back, and they'd say some fabulous bit of technical stuff, and I'd put my hand and say, and that's good, but how does that relate to the human experience? How does that emerge? What shifts in us? And some lecturers loved me and some found me a little bit tiresome. So in the book, what we've done is we've scattered, littered, but we have breaks. It's a literal box we call a clinical note. Mm-hmm. So I was noticing this morning as I was just flipping through, we go and we describe the HPA axis, which is very important in our understanding of the nature of upregulation of the sympathetic nervous system, the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis. So if you've got the theory down, then we have a clinical note that says, okay, now here's what you might see. Here's what's going to be on the surface, these emergent properties. And you can have depression coming out of HPA axis activity. You can have anxiety coming out of HPA axis problems. You can have aggressive behaviors. You can have passive behaviors. You can have lethargy. You can have good sleep. You can have bad sleep. You can have daytime sleep. There's lots and lots of ways in which this thing will emerge. And we need to be sensitive to the possibilities and expand our mind into a knowledge base that allows us to either, where we might have an expertise, as you say, it's not a bias, I think it's a preference, and it's a comfort and it's a confidence zone. But that also gives you the confidence, and the what we need to is move away from bias is then to put it as our knowledge as a springboard where we go, oh, this actually doesn't fit my preference. Wonder what else it could be. I wonder who else I could utilize to assist me, or I wonder what research I need to do, which of course goes back to what you were saying before, that reflection. It's not only what I did in the session, which was good and which was not good, where didn't I know stuff? And that's interesting. And this is one of the chapters that is a part of my work in the last chapter, which is future thinking, is the power and wonder and usefulness of curiosity in the frame, as different from knowledge base, but curiosity to find, how does my stuff fit in here? Oh, what are they doing? That ability to be curious about, oh, the client's now talking about what they think and their beliefs. Oh, wow, they want some CBT. Or, by golly, they're talking about their upset, but they're talking about how they keep getting sore stomachs. Oh, wow, maybe it's gut-brain axis. Or they'll do a particular movement, as you say, the pigeon, they'll do think, what's this behavioral association we've got going here? And our real skill is the ability to recognize and attune and then co-create some kind of beneficial change, as different from the solo activities of the client, which unfortunately are hitting, which aren't gelling.
Yeah. So our hope is that the book will be, as Richard said, a springboard. We could only fit so much in a book, of course. We've gathered so many hundreds of articles since 2013. And so we've just distilled, a small portion of that just as a springboard. And we're hoping that, this will stimulate curiosity for people to go and research more. And of course, we have our platform, the Science of Psychotherapy.net, where you can dive in and go deeper and explore more.
How did the title come about?
Yes, well, we start because we're working with Nortons in America, who are sort of the one of the principal publishers of therapeutic books. It's pretty heady company we're in there. So we said, well, we had a bit of discussion, and eventually we got them to accept the Science of Psychotherapy. They were a bit worried about Lou Cozzolino's book, The Neuroscience of Psychotherapy. We said, no, it's quite different. So we got them to put their brand, our brand in there. which was fabulous. And you might see behind me the Mirroring Hands book, the one I wrote with Ernest Rossi, is the Practitioner's Guide to. So I thought, I could get sort of like a recognized series here. So I suggested that to them, and they do it. So now maybe all my books will be the Practitioner's Guide to, I don't know, Matt and I will write, but volume 2. So it really was a pragmatic type of process, and the cover too, which we could show it, but we haven't got one yet. It's on a ship somewhere, but we started out with sort of bold, bold blues and things, and they came back with a very pastel-y sort of thing, but a nondescript type of image. And then we thought, oh no, the pastels are right. And we've eventually got this lovely, diverse, but light-looking cover, which has got the two heads of the relationship, but above it we have, and around it we have just gentle images of DNA and of the brain and of the heart and of all those other aspects of the body that we're trying to say this is about a whole bunch of stuff. So beautifully, it was a co-creative process, and so we kind of practiced what we preached.
I think probably the practitioner's springboard to the science of psychotherapy would be even more on point. But maybe that's for the marketing people at Norton. That wouldn't be the right sort of title.
Yeah, there's so far. You can take things so far.
And how can people find out more, or get in contact, or look at your other works? Where should our listeners go to?
Certainly. So you can go to the scienceofpsychotherapy.com, and that is the place where you will find our podcast and other free things. And for people that want to jump on board into the academy, that is the scienceofpsychotherapy.net.
And they'll find links on the scienceofpsychotherapy.com that and it gives descriptions of what we do in the academy. So the academy, we have we've really curated the many articles that we've got. We've got a lot of video work. We've got about 450, so you're getting a bit more now, sort of
over 500.
Over 500 now, and it's nearly 1,000 hours of educational material. Some of which we've sort of formatted into where you can get a certificate, so you can take that to your association. And we're still working on that because there's a lot. Because we produce a magazine, 50-page, 3 or 4 or 5 article magazine every month. So that's all a part of your engagement with us. And in fact, actually, this month we're making that available making that freely available, making it open access for the month. So our March issue, which includes John Arden's foreword to our book, Catherine Rossi doing some wonderful work on mind-to-body work with grief. We've got Matt doing terrific looks into McGilchrist's current book, and talking about that aspect of psychopathology, schizophrenia, left brain. And there's a couple of comments from me in there somewhere. And so that's available, and you can just go in there and you can find links to that at those sites.
Yep. Absolutely fantastic. And before we finish up, I need to ask, because I'm always interested, what's next for you both?
Volume 2. And I just had to turn my light on. It's getting dark in Sydney.
So,
Matt.
Well, we've really got our work cut out for us in terms of expanding what we already have on the science of psychotherapy. So we want to do more documentaries. We're out there, doing a lot of interviews, so documentaries and just expanding our base of knowledge.
Yeah, so I mean, the documentaries we'll do probably about 3 or 4 a year. I mean, this is on top of the magazine. This all becomes freely access to our members, and but non-members can purchase it as a one-off. It's only about $5 or $10. But we've done one on the gut-brain axis, which is really helpful because there's so much that can go wrong in our cognitive perception and our emotive perception because of what's going on in the gut. The second one was on autism, And we were just so fortunate to get Temple Grandin to come in and have a chat to us. And Steve Porges is in there talking about his wonderful work with what's going on in the ear and how you can improve autistic states from just training the ear to work more successfully. We're now working on two, sort of a bit as we add the material, but one on schizophrenia, which I think is really helpful, because not that psychotherapists should be treating schizophrenia, but if you've got someone coming into your clinic with behavioral and various issues and it is schizophrenia, how do you know? You need to be able to have some indicator, some insight, to be able to say, oh, whoa, just a minute, I think you need to go see a psychiatrist. I think we need to move this further. So it's, again, this recognizing, attuning, and then co-creating a beneficial experience. And we're also just beginning some work on grief, which I think is a terribly important area of concern. And I think grief is one of the big things that we'll be dealing with in the next decade, but certainly in the next short term, because there has been a lot of loss, not only of life, but of possessions, of things in Australia, overseas. The world's a bit mad, but there's going to be a lot of grieving in the next little while.
Absolutely.
Thank you very, very much for that. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge and what you've accumulated over an extensive period of time as human beings, if I can call it just that as well, from different walks. And for me, it's always fascinating hearing different perspectives. There's something that comes from a conversation where we collect things that are in line with our thinking and it resonates. There's other things that hopefully conflicts with our line of thinking, so we can re-explore, or we can reflect. We can maybe discard something, or we can maintain something. I think an open conversation is wonderful, and that's what I hear what you guys are doing as well. Is speaking to lots of people and keeping a narrative and a conversation going, and I think we're all richer for it. And I want to thank you both for sharing your valuable time with me today as well, and starting another conversation.
Thanks so much, Nesh.
Yeah, some great directions you took us on, Nesh. It was really good. You could see that it was the hard to shut us up, but it was beautiful. I was really loving your interest and your curiosity.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us on the show.
Thanks very much, Richard. Appreciate it, Matt.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please support it by going to iTunes and putting a review, subscribe, share it via social media, and tell others about it. Start a conversation. It's listeners like you that make this able and possible, and why we bring in these guests to go out and share their knowledge and resources. And just lastly, if you are a psychologist and you want to go out and be part of a bigger team, develop your experience and get into some exciting work, come to strategicpsychology.com.au/careers and reach out. I'd love to hear from you.